Hello, I'm Steve Jones, and I'm running for Kentucky House of Representatives District 23. I'm making a series of videos to talk about specific issues and things that I think are important. The issue I'd like to talk today is about the recent vetoing of Senate Bill number 9 by Governor Andy Beshear. I think that was an appropriate and correct thing to do, and let me tell you why. I've got a copy of the bill right here. It's about 25 pages long. You can download it off the state's website. It's available for everyone to see. I would highly recommend that if you think you're going to comment on this bill, that you read it first. Not that you read a summary of it written by somebody else. That could have been interpreted or biased or pro or con, but you read the actual bill yourself. I warn you, reading bills is tedious and somewhat boring. They often reference other pieces of legislation that you have to go back and reference because they talk about changing this section of this bill of this whatever, and so it's tedious to read. But if you really want to talk about it, you really got to read it. I have several documents here I'm going to share with you as I talk. I want to first deal with an article. This is from the Northern Kentucky Tribune. I printed it off their website. It's an article entitled "Beshear Vetoes the Born Alive Abortion Bill, Saying Law Already Provides for the Protection of the Children," which it does, and we'll discuss that. The article is by reporter Mark Maynard. I just want to share some quotes with with you. This is the decision, the vetoing of the bill is what it refers to. The decision brought sweeping response from Todd Gray, the executive director treasurer of the Kentucky Baptist Convention, who called it, quote, "absolutely unimaginable. I cannot conceive the type of thinking that allows an elected official, in this case Governor Beshear, to simultaneously preserve life by slowing the spread of COVID-19 and disregard the life of the unborn," Gray said. Gray wasn't alone in being upset over the veto of the Born Alive Act. House Speaker David Osborne said he was, quote, "outraged and saddened over the decision to veto a bill aimed at protecting human life," and Attorney General Daniel Cameron called it, quote, "reprehensible." "Make no mistake, the governor had a choice and he used it to defend the indefensible," Osborne said. "The Born Alive Act simply requires physicians and other health care givers to provide life-saving medical care to infants who survive an abortion. This is about protecting a human life outside the womb." And the article goes on stating, this is Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General, quote, "The governor, who claims to have everyday family values, vetoed a bill that would require babies born after failed abortions to receive life-saving medical care," Cameron said. He called the veto a, quote, "affront to the people of Kentucky, whose elected representatives voted in bipartisan manner for the bill." And finally, Osborne, the Speaker of the House, chimed in again. It is a miracle for an infant to survive an abortion and to not render assistance is unthinkable, Osborne said. State law and federal laws are insufficient in addressing this, and unfortunately we learned all too well from the cruelty that these infants endure when the Virginia Governor Ralph Northam publicly defended and a New York political activist celebrated the heinous practice. Boy, a whole lot of things to talk about there. Let's start with the very end. First of all, talk about New York political activists celebrating the heinous practice. Listen closely. No one celebrates an abortion. No one. Not Democrats, not Republicans, not the Green Party, not independents. Nobody celebrates abortions. That's just hyperbole and exaggeration to try to get people all riled up, saying that these New Yorkers, these people from New York, and that's something we see all too often in the South. If you're from New York, if you're from the North, a big city, paint you as being evil, saying the New Yorkers were celebrating that practice. They weren't. No one is. No one does. No one celebrates abortion. He then also addresses as he spoke about the Virginia Governor Ralph Northam and his issues and what he had said. What that had to deal with was simply this. Imagine you're a woman who's pregnant and maybe 6 weeks out from your pregnancy, you discover your doctor is doing maybe a routine ultrasound, or maybe there's some kind of complication, you're feeling a little extra pain. As a precaution, they do some extra tests, and maybe 6 weeks out they discover that there is an abnormality with your unborn baby that means it's not going to survive. That it's going to be born and live for minutes, maybe a half hour after it's born. And during that time, it's going to suffer immeasurably. It may be having tremors. It may be in excruciating pain. And they're rare, but there are medical conditions that happen that cause babies to be placed in this situation. And that's another key thing that's never mentioned. These are extremely rare. It's not like, oh, well, this happens 40 times a day in hospital A. It just doesn't. This is an extremely rare circumstance. And in that circumstance, the mother has to decide what to do. Does the mother have the baby, go through with childbirth, even though she knows it's going to die? She's going to have to watch it die and suffer. The baby's going to suffer horribly. The mother is going to have to suffer horribly just watching her baby, who she loves, obviously, even though it's not born yet. The mother obviously loves her child. Or should she have the ability to allow the baby to be peacefully pass on into the next life before it's born? That's a tough decision. That's a horrible decision. Not which way you choose. That's not what I'm talking about being horrible. The horrible thing is having to make that decision. Can you imagine? And I can't. I can say I can, but I'm not a man. I'm a man. I'm not a woman. I can't imagine being in that position. Lying there in the hospital bed, expecting to deliver a baby in just a few weeks, and suddenly realizing that it's not going to live. It's going to suffer horribly. And what can I do about it? And all the laws that they were talking about with Northam and the issues was simply saying it should be up to the woman and her doctor to make that decision. To save the suffering of the child, to save the pain and agony, and allow it to pass on peacefully, or be born and suffer horribly. And the laws they're talking about, trying to paint it as so evil, don't say the mother has to have the abortion. The laws are saying it's up to the mother. Some mothers may choose to go ahead and have the baby and want to hold it while it suffers for those few minutes. That's fine. I'm not questioning their right, which way to choose. I simply question their right to be able to choose, and they should be able to choose. But anyway, so that's those two issues that are just nonsensical in the context of the argument that they're trying to present. Then I want to address the part where it says state and federal laws are insufficient in addressing this. Again, simply not true. There are already state laws saying that you cannot kill somebody, you cannot murder somebody. And even at the federal level, there is another document, and this is a federal law, and imagine that, a federal law that's only 1 page long. Imagine that. It took 25 pages to try to make their point here, but the same point is made in a 1-page thing for the federal government. This is a copy of make sure I get the name right, the Born Alive Infants Protection Act of 2002. So this bill, this federal law, which applies to all 50 states, it's not negotiable, it applies to all 50 states, has been in effect since 2002. So that's 18 years. 18 years this law has been in effect. I'm going to read parts of it to you, most of it, not all of it, but it's nowhere near as confusing to read as the state law. Section 1, the short title, this act may be cited as the Born Alive Infants Protection Act of 2002. Section 2, definition of born alive infant. A, in general, Chapter 1 of Title 1 of the United States Code is amended by adding the following, number 8. And what they're referring to as the Chapter 1, Title 1 of the United States Code, this is a breakdown of the things that make up that chapter right now. There are 7 things. This adds an 8th thing. And what that code is simply like a glossary, definition of terms. what does X mean? Like one of the ones, number one of the code, words denoting number, gender, and so forth. So whenever you see the word gender or number, this is what it means or cannot mean. Vehicle, as including all means of land transportation. Vessel, as including all means of water transportation. So it's like a glossary. It's like a definition of terms. So this, but that just part I just read from this, federal law is saying, stick that there in the code. Therefore, this definition in this document applies to all laws in the federal government. So then it goes on, adding that section 8. Quote, person, quote, human being, quote, child, and quote, individual, as including born alive infant. So anywhere there's a federal law that says a person has a right, a human being has a right, a child has a right, an individual has a right, or a responsibility, or an obligation, or whatever it is, that will also now include a born alive infant. And the born alive refers to after a failed abortion. Next section, A. In determining the meaning of any act of Congress or of any ruling, regulation, or interpretation of the various administrative bureaus and agencies of the United States, the words, quote, person, quote, human being, quote, child, and quote, individual shall include every infant member of the species Homo sapiens who is born at live at any stage of the development. Any stage of development. And part of Homo sapiens, human being. B. As used in this section, the term, quote, born alive with respect to a member of the species Homo sapiens means the complete expulsion or extraction from his or her mother of that member at any stage of development who, after such expulsion or extraction, breathes, and note these terms here, these conditions here, breathes or has a beating heart, pulsation of the umbilical cord, or definite movement of voluntary muscles, regardless of whether the umbilical cord has been cut, and regardless of whether the expulsion or retraction occurs as a result of natural or induced labor, cesarean section, or induced abortion. And then there's a few clerical amendments and things to that. So, but in essence, what they're saying is that a baby who is born alive after a failed abortion is considered legally a person, and therefore all the laws, such as laws against murder, apply to that person. So to kill or not aid a baby born after failed abortion is already murder at the federal level. But supposedly that wasn't sufficient enough. But then we look at the Senate bill for Kentucky and look at item number 3 on the very first page. See if you've heard this before. Born alive, quote, born alive or quote, live birth means the complete expulsion or extraction of an infant from his or her mother, regardless of the state of gestational development, who, after expulsion or extraction, whether or not the umbilical cord has been cut or placenta is attached, and regardless of whether the expulsion or extraction occurs as a result of natural or induced labor, cesarean section, or induced abortion, shows any evidence of life, including but not limited to one or the more of the following: breathing, a heartbeat, umbilical cord pulsation, definite movement of voluntary muscles. In other words, almost identical wording to the federal bill. So there you have the fact that the legislation introduced by the Senate and passed by our legislature to protect the lives of an infant so that they aren't allowed to die after a failed abortion are already in place at the federal level. We don't need to repeat them at the lower level, at the state level. Because remember, if it's in effect at the federal level, it automatically applies to all 50 states. Going back to the article from the Tribune, or the Kentucky Tribune, here is, in my opinion, and I'm not spoken to the governor, so I don't know, but here's the real reason I think the governor vetoed the bill. Because I'll tell you this right now, I don't know for sure, and I've not talked to the governor, but I think if what I just shared with you was all that was in the bill, I don't know that the governor would have signed it into law. He may have still vetoed it, I don't know. But I think there was be a much greater chance that he simply wouldn't have signed it and would have allowed it to time out and become a law automatically, so it didn't have to become a law with a signature on it. Because all the stuff that we just talked about, it's already a law, and we all agree with it. The Democrats aren't saying, no, you should have to kill the baby. That's what people get in an uproar about. We're not saying that. I am perfectly fine with that federal law that if a doctor botches an abortion and the baby is born alive, yes, every method possible should be used to save that baby. If that's what the mother chose, is to go ahead and complete that pregnancy. And I'd say almost all Democrats say and think that. Um, but what was also in the bill, which you don't hear talked about, and again, it's in the big copy of it if you go through it all, but this article calls it out specifically. Um, the bill also included a provision that would have allowed the Attorney General to enforce a law requiring abortion clinics to have a written agreement with a hospital so that patients may be transferred to the hospital if an emergency occurs. You don't need a written order for that. It's more or less saying you have to have a written order in the government to say it's okay to take someone to the emergency room to save their life. You don't need that. You don't need to have a written agreement with that. That's just a chance for Daniel Cameron and the Republican Party to start meddling more in the abortion issue. And it goes on, the bill also, and this is the real kicker, it gives the Attorney General the ability to deem what is an essential medical service. Abortion has been deemed an essential medical service during the COVID-19 quarantine. There's the real kicker. That, I think, is why the governor vetoed the bill, and I agree with him 100%. It's not up to the Attorney General to decide that, what is and what is not an essential medical service. The governor has said many times himself, he's leaving that decision up to the health officials in the health department to make that decision. The Cabinet for Health and, is it Cabinet? I forget which cabinet it is, but it's the one where all the medical decisions like that are made. He's leaving it up to the doctors. You know, the doctors, the experts, not Daniel Cameron, who's the Attorney General, who, by the way, has never, ever tried a case in his entire life, yet he is the Attorney General of our state and is responsible for trying all the cases and seeing that they're tried. He wants to wade into now the national issue of abortion and thinks he's ready to try that case. I'd be afraid of that if I were even a Republican. But anyway, he wants the ability to say that is a non-essential service. And of course, it is, because Republicans have already put a time limit, a window when a woman can have an abortion. And what's he got the ability to say, well, it's not an essential service. No one could have an abortion as long as he wanted to say that. And so it more or less, as long as we're under emergency orders, which could be for the next 6 or more months or a year or more, a woman will be denied her federal right to an abortion. So, and of course, that would then also lead to a federal lawsuit, because what he's proposing would, and if he told a woman, no, you can't have an abortion because it's not an essential service, we'd go into another federal lawsuit. We'd spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and we'd lose that case as well, and we'd be right back where we started. So this bill is a piece of junk. I mean, that's really what it is. It's a piece of bipartisan, or not bipartisan, it's a piece of partisan crap. The only purpose of this bill was to get the governor to veto it, which the Republican Party here in Kentucky knew he would. I mean, and I don't blame the governor. I would have vetoed it as well. Think about it. If this was so crucial, if they were so concerned about all these poor babies that are supposedly being allowed to die and suffer at the will of the Democrats, why did they vote and pass this bill on the last day the legislature was in session? Why didn't they pass it previously with all the other bills that they overrode the veto on? There is no possible answer, none at all, except for the fact that they wanted the governor to veto this because they wanted to be able to attack him. And that is the most partisan crap I've seen in a long time, but not wholly unexpected from this legislature. If you wanted this passed so badly, if this was such a critical bill to saving those babies that you keep talking about, why did you not pass it earlier? And then when the governor vetoed it, override his veto? Because you have the votes. We saw that. You overrode every other veto he did, you know. And I don't think you were really that concerned about Cameron getting that power that he wanted, because I think you realized that you'd be in for a big federal lawsuit, and you didn't want that either. So, that would be, we can kind of show how supportive we are of Cameron getting that ability, knowing full well he's not going to get that ability, and that will save us a lawsuit. But this was simply a partisan attack on the governor during the middle of a health pandemic, while the guy who's, brand new to being a governor is doing the best he can and doing an incredible job, I would add, at keeping Kentuckians safe and alive. You're going to try to pull crap like this and try to smear his name because, quite frankly, his approval rating's skyrocketing, and the Republicans can't have that. They can't have the governor have good skyrocketing ratings. So they had to pull out the, quote, he's a baby killer supporter card. This bill is a joke, should never have been signed. Those who sponsored it and those who signed it and voted for it should be ashamed of themselves. And that includes Steve Riley, my opponent in this race. He supported this piece of junk legislation. This isn't what we're supposed to be about, wasting all this time, the effort, the money, putting together legislation like this, doing these partisan attacks during a health pandemic. But unfortunately, that's what we've come to expect from the Republican Party, nationally and in our own state legislature. Try to push things through that aren't needed, try to hide things, try to muddy the waters, make issues to things that aren't issues, call our teachers out as horrible names, claim that children were getting raped and killed and whatever else when they were protesting in Frankfurt. It's just awful. It's a mess. Should never have happened. And I want to reiterate, I support 100% Governor Andy Beshear vetoing that bill. It was a piece of junk legislation that should never have happened. And there you have it. There you have my stance on that bill. But I thought it was important enough to talk about it because it's an unfair attack on our governor. And it's just game playing by the Republican Party. And that's why I'm running for office. It's time to stop playing games, and it's time to go back to really serving our people. Thank you very much for your time. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.